1, 2, 3. We on. We online. BCSWomen's Accelerator. What I'm gonna do is now check with my iPhone. This is working. Yeah, I will do that. Let me just check if I have a proper picture. Yes, it is. I saw myself. Let me check on YouTube. It's called yeah, there is.
Nice.
There's 30 seconds delay. So I'm watching everything with 30 seconds delay. See you now. I need one of these tables more. I'm gonna bring it in. I wanna keep people going across.
Oh, I think KSJ is, I mean, that's okay. House, I think it's yeah, yeah. I mean, so yeah, the large stage, that's good. So yeah, the numbers were generous. That's 5 o'clock. But Cameron, yes. I mean, I emailed her at the start of the week.
One, two, three. 1, 2.
Yes. Not here, just getting it. Oh, yeah. Yeah, two one sides, boy and a girl each side. So it's this one, Bill. Okay. Cool.
things with names and stuff on it.
Or are you just going to sit down again?
That's a good question.
Okay.
I can ask why he's here if that makes sense.
I have a feeling that's just going to be no.
Oh, right.
At the moment.
Just wanted to know, we don't have the names. I can't even know, I can just look at it. So,
I mean, I have the names on the spreadsheet.
I just wanted to see, well, it was just the little program that, how was it? You know, that had what was when he was here in the vault.
Oh, the schedule.
Yeah, that was what I
Good one.
wanted.
Right, yeah, I can think about that. I'm not good as a physical.
So, is it something you print on the fast one?
Well, I was having those problems. Talking to the printers.
It's not exact, don't worry.
It's on the audio presentation.
That's the receptionist screen now.
Yeah.
Well, the receptionist has gone now.
Hi man, you alright? How you doing? Good, sounds good.
Stretch, yeah. Stretch.
Yeah, I think it's nice and cool. We're online, so
Sorry?
we're online over there.
This room's good.
Nice and chill.
Yeah.
Outside the room. Okay, so, right, more inside. Main table.
Yes.
Is that the two guys going to video there?
There's a third
Yeah.
one as well.
Video this time?
Yes, that's right.
Which place are you going to see the best? This presenter will be sitting there.
Okay.
So we may have to find some place just behind the setup there. Yeah, it's up to you. You find maybe here, maybe this side, or this angle.
I just realized.
Fence.
Okay. That's incredible.
Big. You're already streaming live.
You're streaming right now?
Oh, yeah. You see?
Okay.
So we just set up everything. It's good to go.
Cool.
Yeah, I think
Yeah,
that's
that's
the
good.
best.
Cool. Do you know much about the format?
I have no idea.
Okay.
I would decide to put a 60 the save file or present.
I was wondering about the event itself, presentation.
Oh, okay. Oh, that's I have no idea. I'm guessing it's gonna be like presented then some officials then across the board. We don't have actually a plan. Who's who, when, just you guys put the microphone value, that's it. Make it work. That's it. Anyway, just find yourself, if you need access to any kind of power,
Yeah.
I think you find one box here. Tape is here if you want tape it. Yeah, there's one free.
Nice.
What about this?
Yeah, you can that one as well. That's it.
Looks good.
I'll be around it to set up this screen.
Do you think we'll keep the lights like this, or do you think we'll turn the lights down?
You want more lights? Because if you
Yeah.
bring more lights, those screens are gonna lose a bit in
Yeah.
visibility.
Yeah, I think this is okay as long as it doesn't go darker than this.
No, it won't be darker. They're gonna be probably dark now because you're gonna keep those screens visible. We're gonna put more lights. It's very easy.
Great. Cool.
This is not modern system.
Yeah.
That's what they have. It's this kind of those projectors they use.
Yeah. Right.
They're not that bright nowadays projectors. With the laser technology.
Is the events organizer here already, or are they arriving later?
I think there's some people from the team. They're already on
Cool.
somewhere around here.
Cool.
So yeah, just start preparing yourself. Eventually, if you have more questions, they probably start at 6 o'clock. So I'm guessing.
Yeah.
Probably you see the people walking over there. So it's one of them. So you can ask.
So, cool.
Which one you want, etc.
Thanks, Fred. Okay. Yeah, that was really trippy. I'm so glad it wasn't just me. Yeah, it was I guess because the rooms are divisible to 3. That just totally blew my mind. You could do, you could really set up a cool shot. You could do a really cool mirror room shot.
Yeah.
You know? you'd have to move, I guess, you'd have to move that clock over there. Just need two guys who look exactly the same.
It's like over the shoulder or something.
True.
Yeah, it's behind.
Or could just do POV,
Yeah. Yeah.
mirror shot. So he just leaves with his hand, I guess. And then runs across the room to the. Yeah, we should get those shots. Okay, so two cams. I guess we can't use this side because we want to be in this guy's eye line, unless we can be to the side there. How are you?
Tired.
You right in?
Yeah, just like 15 minutes to the
Should be good.
But yeah, it's really nice. So if you can test the bus, it comes like every 15 minutes. And it goes quite well. But I need to fix the back. Yeah, the lights and stuff.
I personally feel like the lights are a bit of a scam.
Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like the distance are very.
Just so people can see.
Yeah. But in London, because the streets are well lit.
I think at least some like reflective stuff.
It can't run. Cool. Should I unpack something?
Yeah. When you're taking off, I think it's pressed the button to tighten it. It's the
It's quite steady. So why was the day long today?
long.
Yes, it is. Tiring.
Just go this up.
Yeah. Just been working on treatment. Mouth.
Yeah. Is that the same to that competition?
Yeah. Stuff will be nice.
Yeah, exactly. It's not
Yeah.
going to stop you from working, so it's going to stop you from working and chatting at the same time.
This is not just an FYI.
Okay, that's cool.
Just leave it aside.
Yeah. But also like just going to the tracker as well.
Right. No shades.
Thanks.
Means fewer chats. There seems to be a lot of space back there. Is that okay? Or how much time it took someone to set up the chats. We'll go through it.
We don't mind doing it.
Right. So do you want to pass through? Yeah, and the disabled toilet is through this door, right? To one of the toilets. The only challenge was it's not big enough. You turn around, so you need to reverse because I mean, it's big, but we can on the side.
Yeah, it's
Yeah, but whatever.
So Sam's still on his way.
Thank you.
Yeah.
By the way, team office.
Are we okay, sir?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. Cool. Could you just run through what it's going to be? There's going to be a panel.
Very good question. Yeah, so the speaker's here actually at the end. VLP reception, so if you can go out in a little while.
That's nice to speak to you. Cool.
Yeah. But there's some content of her talk that there seems to be some delicacy about. I don't know if it's privacy stuff.
Right.
I don't fully understand what that is. I have flagged it as sound. So it might be the camera looks at the speaker, but what might be happening on?
We're going to have two cameras, so we're going to have a wide, which will have the screen, and then we're going to have one which will be a close-up.
Yeah.
So we just got to that.
Yeah, I mean, it might
sections.
all have to happen in the editing afterwards, capture it
Yeah.
all, don't they?
Just as long as we know as well as
Yeah.
now. So we have a chance to be
Yeah.
sure that we've got a camera. The other thing is the lights. Are they going to dim down?
Could be. No, I've never actually been here at one of these events myself. So this is the first time I've attended and been this involved in it. So, yeah, I guess they're a bit too early.
It's we need to be aware of it.
Right. Yeah, of course. Okay. Yeah.
So we have to speak as well.
Yes, I think so. But then the staff here will probably have a better idea of what works. I mean, the thing is with the lights down, you get a better, you can see the screen better, can't you? For the audience. Yeah, let me go and find that one actually.
Great, thank you.
Yes. Yeah.
Generally, we can license videos and other content we get on the list.
There's a different range of possibilities. I can't see it being back though.
Yeah, and I guess if there's only if the light switches are at the back, it's going to be a bit passive to turn them off.
Yeah, so it's, obviously it's three rooms into one, so you've got various switches that have to be flipped.
So should we?
So the speaker at the moment, because they're doing this VIP reception thing.
Oh, I see.
So I don't just stroll in there and say,
Right.
we talk to you about settings. So if I give her so if I give her another 10, 15 minutes, is that all right? That's still good. You just need to know those things.
Yeah, just a little bit. Great, thanks.
Once you find out, I'll let you know.
Simon, is it all good to go? Is Maya here? Happening?
I believe so.
Excellent.
So I've not long got back from a dental appointment.
No.
Okay, we're taking an X-ray, here's the antibiotics, and it starts with that.
That's not so good. Need to run.
Yeah, I think that from what I've been told, the live stream is live streaming.
Okay.
So going to
Excellent.
carry watch. There are chairs.
But at least that gives them some kind of like fuzzy security that's actually going the right thing.
Hi,
It's
yeah.
it's been just a picture for a while. But that's good.
So,
That's fine. It's really exciting.
there was a happy, I say happy accident.
Yeah.
There was a guy who wasn't totally aware of what that, so they started doing it this morning. Where the string is an accident.
Okay.
Then they discovered that there were some issues with the camera. And I was thinking of it, so okay, well, that's going to now you start this link or swap, so it's like, okay, so we'll send a new URL out to the
Yeah.
Miles was here, so to do that.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, we've had the times coming out, okay, what's going on with that? Why isn't it working?
They could use those
So
as
to get the software system for it, cover everything.
Thank you very much.
Working.
Because it's quite exciting having white house videos.
Yeah, this was fine before.
Yeah, so I remember last year, I think we did something like
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
in terms of podcasts.
But theoretically,
YouTube.
that should give us the facility to do it anyway. I mean, ladies are just saying, you can watch on this thing because then I don't know, exactly. Can we maybe, I mean, you're probably going to zoom in anyway, are you? I mean, because it's quite a wide shot. If all we really need is once the top is going is Maya and the slides. Yeah, that might be.
I was, we've got a new, I think before maybe liaising with Luke.
Yes. So here, that will explain it. It would be good if there was a kind of automatic.
Yeah, I would have thought that would have been set up, but
Yeah.
and having this handover from the notes from him would be great.
That would have been good, but
Just start off. At the
but you've
start.
coped.
Yeah, I tried. It's, got around working in September and I feel past the weeks works out really big so judgment by name of Rad
I saw that and I thought, is this a person? Or
his
okay.
his was just as stated, yeah, right, he's trying to get compliant.
Absolutely. Are we going to keep some seats?
Lots of reservations.
We should
Indeed.
although it's important. Have you got any like placeholder slides? I know Lee does. I just thought about this when we did.
Do we have placeholders?
No, I can do those. Okay, it's just slides that say who's speaking next, basically. But I can.
Hi, sorry, Miles, I'm Sam.
Yeah, hi Sam. Hi Karen.
Hello.
Maya is in your so as well as signing in.
Yes.
Because we'd like to ask her some questions about how we're going to capture
Yeah.
the presentation.
Yeah.
Do with the, the slides and the video.
The stuff that all seemed sorted out like 4 months ago and now suddenly seems no sorted out.
What was the issue with this slide?
She's got some secret stuff, I think.
Right.
So I think that there's certainly an issue with videos. So the videos involve people
Yeah.
and there's no protection to allow those to be broadcast.
Yeah.
So she can show them in the room, but they can't be kind of kept that before.
Okay.
So, yeah.
So we need to order around the things that don't want to pull around too soon because it's some of it's like so maybe in a couple of minutes I'll get around.
Is this where you'd be live streaming from? So I guess that camera is the sort of tighter end. Do you know anything about what she is? Is she going to be referring to the slides quite a lot? So just
I assume so, because that's kind of the usual thing. So, I mean, I would have thought if we could get some kind of agreement that you could film everything and then chop out the bits that she doesn't like, and she can approve that.
Yeah.
You would have thought that she'd be okay with that.
I guess if this, I mean, I have no idea if it's going on the YouTube channel.
Yeah.
So there might be something there that they would like pick up with it, sort of like automated sort of audio recognition. So,
Yes.
I mean, if there's a listing thing, it would just be for safety of the. I don't know when it comes to that. That link's probably only going to be alive until we finish the edit. So I mean, if
Yeah. Yeah. So when I talked to Luke about that before, he said that we could, that YouTube do archive these things, but we could delete it somewhere. So.
There's a couple of minutes footage from today that I didn't.
Okay. Fine.
Yeah, so this guy, so that guy's discussing why it's not working.
Ah.
Yes,
Yeah, that seems reasonable.
So we-
I mean, because, yeah, I mean, presumably people at the other end, if they wanted to,
No,
that's not, yeah, exactly. They haven't asked if they could do that, that would be rude. So, yeah, so does that sound alright?
yeah, I mean, we'll just get tight and wide, as long as we're told. Don't do that, we get slides.
Yeah. She seemed a bit antsy about her bio slide. God knows what she's going at, it used to be a small. I mean,
Are we all? George, are you going to be ready with this out?
Karen, you alright to go in there?
yes, well,
Because
that might be true, yes. Okay.
I haven't spoken to her today. First thing she was working on hair.
Okay.
So, and obviously people know that you can delay.
Yeah, cool. Yes.
Good to be in trouble.
I'm never going to go to playback again. That was rubbish.
Was it?
Yeah.
Got some trouble,
But, well, okay, so if I'm going to go in, I'm probably not going to use
I just got both empty bottles of rice. You just read that.
I mean, it's a bit of a...
Yeah,
Because it's just to say, oh,
yeah, it didn't even dawn on me to do that.
I did think about it when I was at the airport, and then kind of went in. I mean, I could probably find last year's one.
Should we go and get one?
Go to one first. Well, so dead right. No, I'm part of so I'm British Island and
Oh, yeah.
coordinate
Very good.
and we choose the it's what's the game? So we try and
Suppose this is to be open
Testing 1 2, testing 1 2, testing 1 2, 1 2, testing 1 2.
Yeah, it's coming through. It sounds like it's like a fan or something.
Yeah, there is.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah, that's the aircon, right?
Okay.
Which I can do.
sound like a fan. It just sounds like just noise.
Testing 1 2 1 2. Testing 1 2.
It could be the computer. Is that making noise?
It's not making much noise, no.
Meeting last night, I was just about able to
Testing 1 2
see in the door.
Testing 1 2 1 2. Testing 1 2. Any better?
I think we're as good as it's getting.
Yeah. Testing 1 2. Testing 1 2.
Yeah.
Testing 1 2.
Are the speakers stand up now?
So,
Are the speakers stand up now?
the speakers are switched on, yes. Yeah. So, speakers, we find there's one there, and then there's one above you guys as well. So, on this side,
And will it be this volume? Will it be this volume?
it'll be about this volume, yeah. I mean, we can turn it up or down. Is it as good as it for you guys, or?
Can we turn it up a little bit?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Testing 1 2 1 2. Testing 1 2. Testing. Right.
Stuff is here now. I'm away. I like it all.
I'm just wondering if this
The problem is that the Q&A is a bit people sitting there and they just bring this higher. Would you put the camera on the table? What do you think?
Better still, swap it for that one.
Yeah, I mean, it should be the time. Yeah, I mean, we got one.
It's actually subjective. Who's going to plug it into the
We should help with people. Actually,
Should we do that now? Okay, that would be great.
See what we can do for
This one.
Shame we're not getting a huge turnout today.
Yeah.
Which must be to do with the Manchester thing. Event earlier, we had a pretty live show.
You're fine now.
Yes, yes. Just going to run a cable down the metal.
Yep, that'd be perfect.
place to make things, whatever it is. And scientists all wants to wear lab coats
So good evening, and welcome to those of you in the room. Welcome to the 10 universities who are watching on live stream, and welcome to the University of Southern California as well. It might be a slightly different time of the day. Today, I'm Paul Martinenko. I'm president of the BCS, and our role is to making IT good for society. And this lecture, as you will see, fits very well into that. Today, we're honouring Karen Spark-Jones. We do this each year with a professional lecture, with a celebratory lecture, by inviting prominent scientists to come and talk about their work. Very delighted to do that today. Very delighted to be able to do that with our sponsor IBM. And I hope you will enjoy the lecture, and I hope you will, for those of you here and for those of you over the windows. So at this point, I would like to hand over to Demelza Farrar, who is the University Programs for IBM in the UK, who will introduce our speaker. So thank you very much.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. As Paul has said, my name is Demelza Farrar, and I'm the University Programs Manager for IBM. It's IBM's absolute pleasure to be here as the sponsor tonight. As we journey into an era of cognitive and cloud, IBM finds itself at the forefront of its technology, Watson, embedding it into AI solutions. Watson Conversation to process text into a meaningful response. Watson Speech to Text to convert a natural voice into text. And Watson Text to Speech to give a meaningful response. And Watson Analytics, Watson Tone Analyzer, uses linguistic analysis to detect emotion and respond appropriately. It is these and other breakthroughs in making AI more naturally part of our experiences that makes me thrilled to be part of tonight and introduce our very special guest speaker. Professor Maya Matrick is Vice Dean of Research at the University of Southern California, Berkeley School of Engineering. As an eminent computer scientist and highly cited robotics AI researcher at USC, amongst many other things, she is the founding director of the Robotics and Autonomous Systems Center. Her inspiration is the vast potential and affordable human-centered technologies, especially socially assistive robotics, as a means of improving the quality of people's lives. Professor Maya's research brings together engineering, health sciences, neurosciences, social, developmental, and cognitive sciences to create robots that can serve as coaches, mentors, and companions, helping people reach their potential. Professor Mayatic has received a number of honours for her work, including the 2009 US Presidential Award for Excellence in Science, Mathematics, and Engineering Mentoring. She also featured in the Emmy Award-winning documentary, Me and Isaac Newton. It is no surprise to me that she is listed 5th of 30 most innovative women professors from across the US universities in 2016. This subject is hugely important. 1 in 3 Europeans will be over 65 by 2060. And the ratio of working people to inactive others is shifting to 4-to-1 to 2-to-1 by 2060. Already by 2020, we will face up to 2 million vacancies in health and social care. So what Professor Mayatic does really matters. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Professor Maya Mataguri.
Thank you. I'm honored to be here. I hear the weather's always like this, right, in London? So I'm enjoying it. It's great to be here. My mom is here. She brought me here first when I was 10. So I want to take you down a walk down memory lane first, because I feel like you hear about the awards, you know, when you're old like me, you get a lot of awards because you've had a lot of time. So let's talk about things that were maybe in some ways much more critical. And I think this is important in particular for women researchers to hear, because there's this crazy expectation that we sometimes put on ourselves about being perfect, knowing what we want to do from age 3 and so on. So I just want to tell you about the meandering path that I've been down, and to say that it's okay. So I was born a long, long time ago in a country far, far away, but not so far away here. But it's now an imploding and disintegrating country, which is sad. It's sad to be from a place that doesn't exist anymore. There won't be a quiz. You'll just have to look at a map and figure it out. And I moved to the U.S., to Kansas at 16, so it was not a sweet 16. Plus nothing against Kansas in particular, although it could be. Personal tragedy. So I looked funny, I talked funny, but I wasn't funny. But I'm really funny now, as you'll see. So it took me some decades to come around. People used to tell me that I should be funny. It would be easier to listen to me. I hope you'll find it easy to listen, and amusing. But really the pivotal thing for me was my uncle, who told me when I moved as a fresh immigrant, and he said, you need to have a real trade. I like psychology. He said, that's very nice, but you need to do something that is really the future. And he said, computers, Maya, are the future. And he said it just like that. I tried to spell it just like that. And I did listen, so that I'll take credit for that. I did listen, I didn't just ignore him. I went into computer science. I dabbled in art, I was no good. Thank goodness for computer science. And it was great. And I've been doing this ever since. And now I want to tell everybody, yeah, it's a great field, but moreover, it's really not what you think it is. And by the time you get in it, it's different from what you thought it was. And that's a great thing. And so I have loved doing research. I love doing research. I love mentoring young people. I also wanted to have more impact out in the real world. And so I also started a startup. That's another thing you can do in computing today, especially it's so hot. I waited long, but my field is really hot now. So this is a great thing. But the best part, of course, is the family. And it's so cool now to be doing a thing that you can tell your kids is cool, and they think it's cool. You know, so it's just a great ride. And so I want to encourage everyone to join in. So, but that's not why we're here. I just wanted to humanize it a little bit. So we are here to talk about robots. So let's talk about robots, because that's what I've always done, robotics. I wanted to do computing in the physical world. And robotics is the embodiment of computing in the physical world, in the here and now with the rest of us. So when you think about robots, when everyone thinks about robots, you think about machines doing physical work. In fact, the word robot is from the Czech robota, which means menial labor. That was the original term. But really, when we're looking at robotics today, we see that robots are doing not necessarily just menial labor, and in some cases not even labor at all. But somehow they're doing some kind of work, all kinds of work, in fact. And it's impossible to miss today, in every bit of media, constantly, all of the talk about robots taking over many of the jobs and doing a lot of human work. So if we think about this future of machines going in and potentially taking human work away, or not so potentially, then if robots are doing work, what are people doing? And there's an interesting bifurcation there of futures that we could consider. Please tell me all the cameras are on me and not on the screen. So when the robots are doing the work, what are people doing? And there's one future that I think was depicted really well in the movie WALL-E, where people were all just sitting around looking at screens, being extremely obese and never moving around, and never talking to each other, but only talking into and through screens. And then robots are running around serving them. And that is one future, and it is a possible future. There's another future in which, or maybe the same future, in which there are other people who aren't let's say, well off, who are the ones that are losing those jobs. So what future are we building? And as a roboticist, I feel like it's certainly my job to worry about that. And I would also encourage everybody in computing in general who is looking at automation, because that's what's happening now, where people will say we're on the cusp, but we might be over it already. What are the implications of the work that we do? So I think it's very important to do that. And I want to challenge you to think, as you think about automation and as you think about these issues of human work being replaced by machines, I would like you to think not just about automation, but also to think about augmentation. So in robotics in particular, when we started, it used to be everything was about the 3 Ds of robotics, the dirty, dull, and dangerous. But that's really not what it's about anymore. And automation increasingly is not constrained. So let's think about, on the one side, automation, machines, whether physical or not, that are replacing human work in order to automate it, make it more efficient, make it more affordable. Versus augmentation, machines that enhance human ability so that people can still do their own work, but do it better. And I want us to contemplate today, and ideally into the future as well, a future in which we are going to continue to invest in automation, but we invest just as much in augmentation, human augmentation, the improvement of the human ability to do our own work. And we will talk about why that's important. So, as was mentioned already, the care gap, this huge gap between the needs that people have, whether you're focusing on the elderly aging population, or whether you're thinking about the rise of developmental disorders in children, autism comes to mind, many others. Really, across the age span, we have challenges. Therefore, we have opportunities. But there's this gap between what people need and what people can get in terms of available care. So if we were to look in that area as a place where automation versus augmentation plays a key role, we cannot automate all of the care, and we shouldn't. And also, even if we could, would we then become the society in which everyone is this fat and lazy kind of an individual? By the way, their lifespan then will go from 70 to 60 to 40. So let's talk about this care gap and opportunity, and let's talk about technologies that people really need. And I really want to think about this. I want us all to think about this relative to what technologies are now being developed, because there are probably 700 apps being developed every microsecond. I just made that number up, but it's probably accurate, or bigger than that, right? So apps are constantly being developed for something or other. And yet, let's look at what actually people need based on what improves health outcomes and longevity. Well, we know that in order to stay alive longer and thrive, we need to have the motivation to do our own work. We have to have the will to live and do. We have to want to get out of bed and do something. I work closely with people who develop the autonomous vacuum cleaner Roomba, and I keep telling them that having the desire to get out of bed and vacuum your own floor will keep you alive longer than any number of autonomous vacuum cleaners. That is a fact. Now, I'm not saying no one should vacuum the floor, but maybe you should do something else, but you should do something. So we need technologies that improve our motivation to do our own work, not do our own work for us. We also need technologies that encourage us to socialize with other people, not with the technologies themselves. For all the marvelous technologies out there, and I have 3 children, so I'm quite aware of this and cannot be a troglodyte and pretend that they don't exist. Nonetheless, there isn't a single bit of evidence to show that human lifespan and wellness are improved through the interaction with those screen-based interactions. And yet, there are numerous science studies that show that when you have even a single friend, a real physical friend, or even just tend to a plant, you live longer. Okay, so there's something about us being wired as social creatures that isn't quite being triggered and driven by screen-based interactions. And then finally, we need technologies that actually adapt to our needs rather than being fixed in what they are sort of trying to impose. So back to the key points, you cannot outsource drive and effort. You cannot delegate that to a technology. You have to want to be and do things. So, still, this is a talk about technology. So, I want to tell you about a field of robotics that is trying to do this very thing. So let's think about it. Robots that help people by not doing any work for people. What a concept. So that's what I'm going to sell you on today. So that is the field of socially assisted robotics. Robots that help people through social, not physical needs. And so we'll talk about how they help, why they're robots, and why this is important. And you can probably think of various things these robots can do. So, anybody will immediately think of monitoring. Oh, we need to make sure that, a person hasn't fallen, because when they fall, we want to report it, right? Monitoring, while useful, is just the tip of the iceberg. And in fact, today, there are many technologies that will help us do this thing that we call the quantified self, right? So I can have all kinds of bands and things, and they will give me a bunch of data about me. But, unfortunately, as behavior science will tell you, being quantified does not change your behavior. So I can know exactly how many calories I consumed and how many steps I walked, and that's not necessarily going to change my behavior. In fact, probably it will not change my behavior. So what do we do about that? Well, what we need is the coaching and training, the motivation and drive and the companionship and socialization. Those are the factors that drive behavior. Those are the things that make us reach our potential, or at least get better at what we do. So those are the kinds of technologies that we want to develop. And I want to tell you about robotics as a particularly relevant kind of technology. It's not the only one, but it has some specific features that I want to talk about because I think they're really exciting. So we want to look at technologies that are capable of not just monitoring, but coaching and training, motivating us, motivating every user to do more and better, and that scaffold and complement human companionship and socialization. So it's not that we want to replace people with these machines, but unfortunately, for the level of need that's out there, as you heard in the introduction, 2 to 1, unless the majority of young people are involved in caring for the people who need the care, there are just not enough people to take care of people. So what should we do? So that's this interesting notion of truly personalized care that is a combination of human and machine care. Now, why should these things be robots? That's the first thing. You could say, well, that's all very nice, but what about just AI? AI is in some kind of a disembodied brain. Well, it turns out that we are evolved social creatures. So if you look at how the human brain behaves in interactions with a screen, you will see that it is different from how the brain behaves when it's interacting with a physically embodied other creature. It could be another human, it could be an animal, or it could be a robot. In all those cases, your brain behaves in a particular social way that it does not behave in when it's interacting with the screen. If you add a tactile component, so physical interaction, then even more of your brain is engaged. This is both in terms of distribution of activation and levels of activation. And we know this from other fields. We know, for example, from learning, tactile learning is very important. People learn more and retain more things longer when they're learning tactily or have some kind of tactile engagement with the environment. The same is true for social engagement. So there is a reason why robots might actually be an incredibly powerful tool for health and wellness and education. So that's why I want to talk to you about socially assisted robotics and not just socially assisted technologies, not just a brain in a back. So I've spent the last 15 years working with amazing students who very bravely put our robots in the wild, and the wild has really been the wild. We went and we looked at all the places where we saw some need. And usually people who had these needs came to us. So we've been very fortunate to have had collaborators across the span who would just kind of say, hey, I saw what you're doing, and what about this? And so we've started in the cardiac disease ward, 1 and 2 adults. These statistics are based in the US. But they're, if you aren't there yet, you're coming our way. So 1 and 2 adults suffers from cardiac disease. In the US, autism is 1 in 68 children, could be as few as 1 in 50. Or rather as many as 1 in 50. The statistics are shifting, quadrupled in the last 20 years. Special education, 1 in 6 children in the US is diagnosed with some developmental delay at some point. Public elementary schools are not a disorder, but they have limited resources and a lot of diversity to deal with. Alzheimer's, 1 in 9, retirement, 1 in 7. So these are all domains in which we have tried to work with these machines. And you might say, well, geez, can't you pick a field and stick with it? I mean, why are you all over the place? And the reason we are all over the place is because what we're really trying to distill are the human-machine interactions that really work regardless of the specific context that we're in, because what makes us human really transcends what you might consider as particularly relevant, but actually isn't fundamental, both culture and gender, and elements like that can be generalized. Because fundamentally, when we need help, when something is not working, we go back to what fundamentally drives us as people. And that is not very different from children with autism, to individuals with Alzheimer's, to stroke patients, etc. So if we can understand those drivers of what makes us who we are and what breaks when we have specific needs, then that's when we can develop these technologies that are general enough to help many people and to actually be affordable. So let me give you a video example. This is a stroke patient. This is filmed in a room which is special and the home that's special, so this is not all of our studies look like this, as you will see. However, the technology is the kind of thing that has been demonstrated with real patients in a lab. So I will narrate through it, and she will also, the participant, Connie, will also talk. And this video is on the web as well, so. No. Sorry. Come on. There we go. Apologies for the glitch. It'll get louder. So, one of the major issues in stroke recovery is the resuming activities of daily life with a stroke-affected limb. It's very easy to compensate for the limb with a limb that isn't stroke-affected, but then your disability never recovers. So you have to use your stroke-affected limb to reach for the cereal. It's very demoralizing, it's depressing, you drop things. On the other hand, that's necessary for hours a day in order to recover. So who will be there to motivate you to do these fundamentally depressing things for hours a day for months and years in order for your brain to retrain? Well, usually no one.
Hey Connie, have you thought about your exercises? I bet you're feeling strong today.
So, well, she's eating fiber, so that's good. There's discipline there, but she's not feeling very strong. We call that the robot trap. If the robot doesn't fall in the water, then it's an intelligent enough robot. It's like a Turing test right there.
Hey Connie, are you ready?
That's a very muscular robot, don't you think? I say that half jokingly. The appearance of the robot is important. So what the robot looks like is important because the person has to accept the robot as a peer or an authority. Or in some cases subordinate, but not as a coach. A coach cannot be a subordinate. So the robot is monitoring, but also motivating and providing social support for Connie to do her really boring exercises.
You can do better than that.
And sometimes the robot needs to be assertive, and sometimes the robot needs to be supportive. And depending on Connie's personality and her state of mind at that particular time and where she is,
But I'm not blind.
I might be a robot, but I'm not blind, right? Different levels of humor, different levels of engagement are necessary, even within one session of 45 minutes, much less every day, every month, every year. So that kind of personalized care is what we're working on. Somebody to cheer along. That's an homage to Rocky. There's always a Rocky movie that one can do an homage for. You know, it's never out of date. This is the important thing. This is an activity of daily life. Eating your cereal, but with a stroke-affected limb. So it's really hard. But why does she do it? Because she could just eat cereal with the left arm. Why does she do it when no one's looking? Well, because someone is looking. And that checking in, so that is the most important thing. The way you see that face that she makes, like, huh? See what I did? Oh, that's enough. It's beautiful, but once it's probably enough. So that fundamentally social thing that we do when we want to prove to someone else, like, see what I did? I tried and this is what I did. That sense of accomplishment that you don't have in isolation, that is much more powerful in the social context, that's the kind of driver that you want to develop with this kind of technology. And it's not going to, unfortunately, work with many other alternate technologies because it's been tried. So there are any number of apps that exist out there that may be fun to interact with, but they don't stick. They don't actually drive behavior, and people let them go all too easily, especially when the going gets tough. So that's when we need real peers. So we worked in stroke rehabilitation for over 15 years, and what we have found now in larger studies as well, these preclinical studies with large numbers of stroke patients, we've found that people actually comply with the instructions that the robot will give, or at least stay engaged with the robot, and maybe don't do what the robot says, but still continue to interact with it. We'll talk about that. And then more objectively, they perform longer on the task, and they will say that they feel more cared for than if they're interacting with the screen, which is sort of the alternate technology. We never, I should say, by the way, we never compare our robots to human caregivers. So I often get asked, well, how well does your robot work compared to a human stroke rehabilitation therapist, physical therapist? And my answer is, I will never make that comparison because we're not developing robots to replace people or compete with people. People are completely special. People will always be the best therapists if they're properly trained and motivated. But if you can't get the therapist, and if you can't get the therapist for enough hours, and if the therapist is underpaid and undervalued and impatient, et cetera, then no one is winning in that scenario. So we're not comparing to human care. We're comparing basically to the standard of care. What is the standard of care? Well, in the US with the best insurance, it's about 2 hours of physical therapy per week for about some number of weeks, and then nothing. So that's what you want to do better than the standard of care. It's not about replacing people. People can't be replaced. So we had some really early insights from stroke rehabilitation that drove everything we did subsequently in like the last 14 years. So I want to show you some early videos because they're such crowd pleasers, but they're not for the web. So you kind of hear the audio. So let's watch an early stroke patient, early in our studies. So this is a very simple robot. It's not very attractive. It's from 15 years ago. And it just beeps whenever the stroke patient shelves the book. You guys can hear that, I hope. So watch what happens every time she raises her arm. And you can see she's got a motor deficit. Her gross motion is affected her final. So, several things to observe here. It's the robot only dings when she raises her arm, but that sets up a positive feedback loop. So it keeps dinging, she keeps going faster and faster. She's self-motivating, and then she keeps talking. And there's no one else to talk to. She's just talking to the robot. Is this for quantity or quality? And this isn't because she does not understand what the robot can do. It's because people talk. They socially engage with agents around them. Again, this is 15 years ago. We'll get to today. Now, there's an important part about human nature that comes here that was as instructive to us as anything. Okay, so she's done. Now what happens? Watch closely. So what'd she do? And look at her face. There's no greater joy than tricking the machine or the therapist. And then she's just doing that and all kinds of things. And look at that. And by the way, what is she doing? She's raising her arm, which is what we want her to do. So there are a lot of things we can learn from this. The things we can learn from this is that the things that people generally think you need in stroke therapy are not the things that you in fact need in stroke therapy. So first, it isn't about telling people what to do. They know what to do. So an app that tells you that you should do your exercises is completely useless. You know you should do your exercises. You're not doing them because they're demoralizing and depressing. So you need something to make you less demoralized and depressed, not to remind you an attitude. First thing. Second thing, people really just either want to have fun or make some success. And so she is motivated by cheating here, not because she's a terrible person. It turns out she's actually a teacher, so I'm pretty sure she's not a cheater in general. But she's just exploring the boundaries of the system. We find in many participants that they will not do what the robot says, but they will explore the boundaries of what if I do this, what if I do that? So if you know that and you design your system to be somewhat surprising, that's going to be much more effective in engaging people. We know this from psychology. We know that irregular reward, irregular feedback is much more effective in producing learning than regular reinforcement. This is old stuff. This goes back 60 years. So why are we not using it in robotics? Then we also know, for example, that in some cases in therapy, human participants will cheat even in front of human therapists just to get over the hump, just to have a little bit of success. And this too should be granted to them out of their dignity so that they can move on. So there are a lot of lessons we learned here. We also learned that you can't always detect what the person is doing, and even today with much better vision and cameras and AI and deep learning, you still can't always know what the person is doing, and you can be wrong in your classification. And if you set up your robot as being perfect, you are sure to fail. But if you set up a robot to be like a peer that has its own limitations, there you can win. So let's just see what happens with Connie when she goes to the next, not Connie, actually I can't say her name, but that's the human subject thing. Let's see what happens. This is the next robot. This one talks with a human voice as it happens. It's pre-recorded. This is all real, no one's steering. Okay, so what's the first thing she does? She tries to cheat. Maybe he knows. How does he know? So then she tries again. How does he know? So she can, it doesn't know. How does he know? So, we
we had an extra sensor, if this were a computer science class, I would ask you, how does he know? And why is it a he, by the way? I mean, what is so male about that? It turns out, actually, most people think that most robots are male. Go figure. Why is that? Well, we can talk about that. We can go riff on that as well. Anyway, so she does this, and in fact, she did this for so long, she kept trying to cheat, and then she started to walk around, the robot followed her, she went into the parking lot, the robot followed her into the parking lot. He's a very loyal robot. So anyway, but we learned many things. We learned that what drives people is definitely not nagging or telling them, you have done 3 exercises, do 4 more, no one cares. So this notion of quantified something or other, it is not about quantifying, it is about motivation. And anyone who's ever had a child should know that, although we continue to try to nag, but it never works, right? We also find that there are large personality differences in how people engage with machines because there are large personality differences in how people engage with people. So people of similar personalities get along better. You probably heard that. You also probably heard that opposites attract. That's not true. So if you look at actual literature in social science, it shows very clearly that people of different personalities early on when they first meet each other, especially in courting, they will change slightly. And that's very exciting to watch. So people like others changing for them, but then they stop changing. And in fact, in most relationships, the ones that last, according to all of the scientific evidence from behavioral science, are people who are pretty aligned in their personalities. Go home and take the Myers-Briggs now. But in the meantime, this is true. I hate to disappoint all those people who got together for differences and then discovered they had differences. So, same with human-machine interaction. If you develop machines that match the personality of the user, people enjoy interacting with that machine better. So, about, I don't know, 12 years ago or so, I had a very smart graduate student, actually a postdoc, who tested this very theory. She developed a robot that was extroverted and a robot that was introverted. And we know how introverted people behave and how extroverted people behave. And so we can create robots that behave in those ways. Actually, introversion and extroversion is really well described in psychology, not the other kinds of personality traits. So we did not, for example, model neuroticism or some of the others, for better or worse. But anyway, there we are. But extroversion, introversion we modeled, and we did find very strong results that if I give you an introverted robot and you're introverted, you're going to perform longer in the task than if I give you an extroverted robot. Also, if you're extroverted and I give you an extroverted robot, chances are that you will statistically tell me that you prefer that one, which is extroverted. Whereas with introverts, we don't get a statistically significant preference, but they still perform much better in the task with an introverted robot. So we are driven by our personalities, and our relationships are driven by our personalities. And so are human-machine interactions. So this is something that you can do badly or you can do well, depending on how you create your technologies. It's an interesting thing. Human personality, however, also is a private trait, so it's not necessarily something that is available publicly. Do you want your machines to know this about you? Some interesting issues of privacy to think about. There are other kinds of things that we learn. We learned, for example, that some people are very comfortable with the robot being in charge, and other people are not. Other people wanted to have sort of more sense of being in charge. In general, having a sense of autonomy for a human is a good thing. People live longer when they have a sense of autonomy, so you don't want to take that away anyway. But then again, you cannot have a therapist or a coach that is never in charge, because then you don't really have any sense of, you don't give them any sense of authority. So there's this interesting balance that has to be struck there. And then, as you saw, even with this participant, very big disparities between adherence and engagement. So adherence used to be called compliance. I don't know how it is in the UK. But in the US, there's a big change from compliance, which seems somehow like people are being beaten into it, to adherence, which is better. But it's basically how much you do what you're told to do by the robot. Okay? And engagement, which is, well, I'm so engaged, I'm doing this for fun. The way you saw her, for example, cheating wildly. Okay? So some people are more adherent, and other people are more engaged. Well, we really want both. We want people to be engaged in the activity and do what the robot says. Well, it turns out that's really hard. It might be impossible for all times and all systems. Because, for example, we know from the literature that human nurses who are most effective are also not the most popular. Kind of makes sense, right? So you can't have it all. So how much can you have? Because also if you have a very unpopular robot, it will soon not be effective because it's a robot and not a nurse. So there are these complex social issues that pop in. So just to go on to Alzheimer's and aging care, so this is another domain we worked in. If there's one thing that you can walk away, well, there are two things I want you remember from this talk. One is that we're not replacing people, and that's not what technology should do. They should enhance, not replace. But the second thing I would have you remember is that it is absolutely not true that, quote, old people don't like technology. That is such a worn argument that certain not-so-great journalists love to perpetuate because, it's got to be hot, got to say something. So that is not a hot thing. It's not even a true thing. Stop saying that. So there have been a lot of studies now of older people in the US that's after 65, whatever it may be, and technology. And we work with 80-plus-year-olds with our robots, and we've had people say things like, well, it doesn't do as much as my iPad. I don't like it. and that's the norm now, and it's going to be increasingly prevalent. So it's not true. The thing that people don't like, any people, regardless of age, is poorly designed technology. So, for example, I now have a phablet. So it's not just a phone, it's a phablet. Because, I'm of a certain age and I want to see the numbers. And what's wrong with that? And if you give me a tiny little phone, I think it's badly designed. And it's its fault, not mine. And that's true, because design now is becoming actually an increasingly important part of technology development. People are starting to realize, it has to work for people. We can't just push technology on people. They won't be just wowed and accepted, because it's just not that new anymore. So this becomes a more important issue. So there have been numerous studies. I'm not talking about my work now. If you look at the body of work, there have been numerous studies to show that elderly users into their 80s smile, pet, hug, and play with robots. They show better health responses. They show reduced stress, less isolation, more socialization with their peers, all metrics. Okay, so clearly the way is paved for developing technology for the elderly. But then the question is how to develop these in a way that actually serves their needs. Because just knowing that they're going to like it, they're still not going to like it if you don't do it right. So I want to show you a study that we did, a very large study with 70 participants, 5 sessions repeatedly. For technology, this is big. I would love this to be louder. There guys go.
Nice job. Super.
So the robot is an exercise coach.
Awesome.
It says lower your left hand. So the idea is that the robot is actually observing what the person does and then helps the person do it better. So you can give them results, not repeat itself. Use the jargon of my graduate student. Now this is a very popular game where the person does an exercise and the robot imitates. Now this is important because it gives more autonomy to the user rather than the robot, right? So the user shows something and then the robot says, I like to exercise. So jokes, humor, levity, these are all important, but at the right level. So you get people smiling, doing the exercises longer, choosing to do more exercises, et cetera, et cetera. There's been an extensive analysis of this. See now, the robot's arm got stuck right there. And it says, it's so much fun, and the arm makes all these sounds. Do you think people like it less for that? No, they like it more. People like vulnerability. So here's an interesting thing. So look at the guy. Do you think he can do the gestures that does he look like in his face that he can do the gestures? No. So, but the robot doesn't know that. And this is one of these moments where you really would like the robot to be a bit smarter. So the robot has shown the user 4 gestures, and now it says do gesture 1, do gesture 4. And you can see the guy kind of smiling nervously, right? So you and I know that he can't do it. The robot doesn't know that, or at least it didn't back then. Now it can. So now the whole point, the whole richness of the interaction is now in this moment, is how you react to that. It's not when the person is doing 6 gestures and you say, oh, this was your 6th gesture. Big deal. What's interesting is now when the user can't do it. So how does the robot react now? If the robot just lets the person fail and says, no, that is wrong, well, that is not going to engage the person. So we've experimented with different approaches to this. One approach is just to say, oh, well, how about you try something else? You've done enough exercises for today. So if you know they're going to fail, avoid failure. People don't like failure, let's avoid it. Another one is to kind of let them do it, and this depends on personality, right? So for some of them, you actually want to drive them a little harder. This is the assertive, extroverted versus introverted personality matching. For some, you actually want to say, oh, what? You can't remember 4? Well, you know, Bob over there can remember 4. We can make that up. Sometimes we actually can give them results that aren't real for other people because they're not specific to any individual, but it still motivates behavior. So there are all kinds of interesting ways of motivating people that, of course, human therapists use all the time, but has not really been transferred to technology because in the technological realm, people feel that just if we quantify it all, somehow, suddenly it's going to be much better. So quantification alone is not. But this idea of sharing autonomy with the robot coach, so sometimes the coach knows something, sometimes the coach, one of the things that we did actually was when the person cheated, we didn't tell them that they cheated, and then later, at the end of the session, the robot is saying, oh, you did great, you did 10 exercises, oh, by the way, I know when you cheated. That is incredibly powerful. So guess who just won? The robot really won now because the robot was much smarter, right? So it's all about how you pace that social interaction. So these are the kinds of subtleties that people use in real therapy that can be transferred. We did a 6-month study with patients with Alzheimer's. There were some really interesting insights that came out of that. The first very important insight was that we actually did, as in this study, this was with 70 participants, healthy elderly. This one was with a much smaller set, but much longer, with Alzheimer's participants. In both cases, we did a side-by-side randomized comparison of human-computer interaction versus human-robot interaction. And we found a very strong result. People preferred to interact with the robot, and they did longer on tasks. Interestingly, with Alzheimer's patients, most of them treated the computer like a TV, and they would be sort of, TV. Whereas the robot to then map to another person. In some cases, maybe their grandchild, right? So they would even think that it's their grandchild. And then they would do what the robot said. But there's a limit to that as well. So there are certain robotics endeavors that are trying to create highly realistic, kind of human-like robots. And then what happens is, sometimes, often, they may fall into something called the uncanny valley. So the uncanny valley is this, it's a valley because it's a graph, because we're all nerds. I speak for myself. But so you can plot how believable something is, how realistic rather it is, and then it's not realistic. And on the other axis, you can plot how much people like it. And at the beginning, when things are really simple, people don't like them so much. The more realistic they become, people like it more and more, and then bam. When you get to a certain level of realism, people stop liking it. Why is that? Because it's creepy. And creepy is the word that people use. So I have to be very scientific when I say creepy. There's a creepiness factor. And that is when you fall into the uncanny valley. People have already observed this with animation. So computer animation, there's certain movies that are just creepy. It's too much. It isn't quite right, and there's too much going on. Same with very realistic humanoid robots. But sometimes it's not even what the robot looks like. It's sometimes even what it does or how it does it. And let me just give you an example. So now this is our robot, which is not creepy at all. Because it's very simple, and simplicity is important. Simplicity is on the other side of the spectrum from creepy. Yes?
Sorry, can you just tilt the microphone up a bit to get a little bit of feedback?
Oh, sorry. I was just trying to make it louder for the videos. So watch what happens in this. So this was, the 6-month study was to try to teach individuals stage 2 Alzheimer's, so pretty advanced, to try to get them to recognize music and then click the right button for each song. And they had different levels of this, so in some cases, if they were doing well, the robot would just say, oh, you know, it would play Singing in the Rain, and it would say, oh, can you push the button for the song about the weather? And then, you know, the person would have to push the button. You can say, why are they pushing the button? Because, again, the connection between physical behavior, tactile, and cognitive is the best way to reinforce learning and retention. Okay, so sometimes the cues are very general, like push the button for the weather song. And in other cases, when the patients were not doing really well, the robot would give them a full level of cues. Can you push the button for Singing in the Rain? Now, what happens when the robot sings? Because the robot can sing, right? So how would you like your robot to sing? Well, let me show you what happens, because the robot sings the song, and then the person guesses what the song is. So we're in for a treat here. This is not Singing in the Rain. You can see that she's singing, which is a big deal. She's singing with a robot. I said we were in for a treat, but now I can't find my cursor, so we're really in a treat because I gotta stop it. Okay, let's stop that. Okay, so first of all, yeah, I always like to say at this point that I'll be selling the CDs later after the talk. But really, so you might say, why are we using this terrible voice of my former graduate student who's a professor now, but I won't give his name in case they're listening. Perfectly nice young man who can't sing. Why do we do that? Can no one sing in my lab? Well, first of all, the women could sing better, just happened. Can't put a woman's voice on that robot, because even people with Alzheimer's were like, it's like dude looks like a lady and vice versa. It's just not good. So, second, if you put a really distinguished human voice that sounds good, like Frank Sinatra, we tried that. First of all, you have to age match it, right? So you can't play Lady Gaga on the robot. Aside from the lady part, it's just not, you can't, it doesn't work, male, female, right? And remember, most people think robots are male. But secondly, you also, if you put Frank Sinatra, that's a male, the robot is male, why not? Even stage 2 Alzheimer's patients will say, that's not Frankie. They might think it's their grandchild, but they will know it's not Frank Sinatra. That is a great example of the uncanny valley. So you have fallen into the uncanny valley by playing the voice of Frank Sinatra. Now the person expects Frank Sinatra, but it's not Frank Sinatra. That's what happens when people, for example, create a robot that looks like Einstein. It's been done. And then what do you think people think of that robot? The main impression of a robot that looks like Einstein is that it's stupid. Because you're expecting Einstein, even though you know it's not Einstein, but still it kind of looks like it, right? So this is a much bigger lesson than it seems. Because people who are striving for the uncanny valley are basically driving themselves right into the hole. Why? Because they're overemphasizing features that aren't important, but are actually going to ruin the interaction. Because we as humans come with all sorts of biases on complex expectations. And if you create a really complex platform that's tapping into all these things and doing it badly, then you lose. So that's where simplicity, a very old concept in engineering, is actually very important. Because the fewer features you have, the more control you have over what's going on. We do not have a full understanding of all of these social factors, right? So as people create super complex human-like machines, they're going to have a harder time engaging and retaining users than with simpler interactions. That was beautiful. I was going to play it for you again, but I won't. Now, autism. Autism is a field that we've worked in for a long time, and it's just gotten worse in a sense. The stroke has too. It used to be 600,000 strokes, now it's going up to 800,000. I mean, the numbers are terrible. But autism is quadrupled in the last 20 years in the US, in other developed countries, and the only reason that we don't talk about underdeveloped countries is we don't have as good a numbers. So it's a very complex set of challenges, and there are very little data, and at least mass data available, in order to do better diagnosis and intervention. But what is known about autism is that some subset of children with autism are very, very interested in machines and mechanisms, and that can be used in a very therapeutic way, including robots. So not just playing with robots, but really having the robots serve as a therapeutic tool. So we and others have been very excited about this and developing this as a form of therapy and intervention, not just in a therapy session, but in the home as well. And so we've done a fair amount of work in the last 15 years. And there's been quite a lot learned in the field at large of robotics for autism. There are more than 1,000 scientific papers published, peer-reviewed, on robotics for autism. So it's a big field for a tiny field. And there have been really interesting repeatable effects, like children with autism interacting with robots have demonstrated initiating play, joint attention, where they share attention with others, social referencing, pointing to things, imitation, talking more, taking perspective, even signs of empathy. These are all parts of the constellation of symptoms that they have. Some children have different, everyone has a different set of exact symptoms, but these are many of the deficits. I just want to show you some videos of some children with autism interacting with some very simple robots early on, and the kinds of behaviors that you see, and then we'll talk about, and this you definitely cannot record. Then we'll talk about why some of this is very insightful and important for research. So this is a boy who spent 30 minutes just flapping through a book before he would even look at a robot. But then very quickly, he gets into a lot of tactile play. Sets his mother's voice in the background. He's nonverbal, interacts with the robot. So this is what used to be called low function. So this child is very severely autistic. You can put him next to a humanoid robot at first. So this down here, there's a humanoid robot. He wouldn't look at the robot initially for the first 15 minutes. Then he started looking at it from the corner of his eye, which is why autism is complex, because a child might be engaged with the robot and interested, but the way they show interest is very different from a typical child. So if you're expecting them to be full on in the robot's face, you might consider yourself failing, but in fact it might be as engaged as they could be instead of looking like this. So he was very he was put off by a humanoid robot, and this is an effect that one may see with more complex robots and individuals with autism. But then after a very short time, compared to interactions with humans, he habituated, and then, and this is the powerful effect, you can just see two-step learning. In the first case, his mother will cue him to imitate the robot, and then you will see him doing it completely spontaneously. And again, imitation is very hard to achieve for some of the children with autism. So this is just an example of kind of the therapeutic effect. So here's the same boy, nonverbal. So the mother cues him, and now he does the robot he wouldn't even look at 15 minutes earlier. And then shortly thereafter, we have same boy, same robot. The robot is in a pose, and the child just strikes a pose spontaneously. Now, if you're with the therapist behind a two-way mirror, you would be jumping up and down, just like the therapist was. This is a big deal, that you see behavior change within a very short session. This is maybe 45 minutes, okay? Now, the real challenge is, first, to achieve behavior change. Second, for that behavior change to stick and generalize to interactions with people out in the real world, not just the robot in the session. And that's what people are working on. And it's interesting to see that these kinds of mechanisms can be used with children with a variety of symptoms. So this is a nonverbal boy, what's considered low function in autism. Old terminology, I actually don't like it myself. Now here we're looking at a boy who's very verbal. He has some sensitivities in terms of auditory and tactile. So here are his interactions with the robot. He's covering his ears, but the robot blows bubbles. He vocalizes, listens to his mom. Now, this all looks very typical, doesn't it? It's a kid. It's just a kid playing with a robot and his mom, right? And that is the ultimate thing. Taking a child with autism and observing them interacting as if they were just another kid. So that's what every parent would want to see. So there's something that emerges. This is not how this boy behaves normally, right? For him, normal is to sit in the corner and flap, right, and stim. So there's something about the dynamic of interaction with the robot that brings out these latent abilities in some children with autism. Now, if the abilities are not there, then of course you can't bring them out. So then that has to be scaffolded and trained. But for some children, it's the inhibition. And so something about the robot makes them exhibit the behaviors, and then they can be reinforced. So that's exciting, and we actually tested to make sure that it was the fact that it's the robot and doing what it's doing. So we did really controlled experiments in which the robot just blew bubbles randomly, as opposed to blowing bubbles when the child pressed the button. So the robot was either completely like a toy, or the robot was contingent to the child's behavior. And even children with autism, who may not be sensitive to social behavior, will get bored with a robot that just blows bubbles occasionally. So it's not just the bubbles, it's the social partner in the robot that is appealing to them. And so there's this whole complexity in autism of trying to get to the bottom of how much the child actually perceives and understands, because it's so hard for them to communicate. There's a lot more going on than people typically get to find out. And to the extent that the interaction with the robot allows us to glean more about what is driving the child, that is the real therapeutic potential. Here's just another video. Oh, maybe. The slide wants to go back on me. You wanted to hear that again, I know. So there's more imitation with the robot. And again, the humanoid robots are always a little bit off-putting to them initially, because people are more off-putting to many children with autism initially. So some interesting. So what can be done from a computational perspective, since this is after all, this is all about computing at some level. Well, the kinds of things that we've done, for example, one of my graduate students did this really brilliant piece of work where he looked at just how the child was moving relative to the mother and other objects in the room. And he observed this from the ceiling, so you couldn't even see who the child was. It was completely anonymous. And just by looking at the distances over time between the child, the parent, and if there were other kids or whatever, you could tell whether the child was behaving typically or atypically. So you could take a completely computational approach, a statistical approach, and you can do sort of a level of screening to see if the child is acting atypically. You could do this in a waiting room of a pediatrician's office. And then just encourage the pediatrician to, hey, notice that maybe something's a little bit off. Because diagnosis and screening is very complex. And the waiting room is a great place to look at it because no one behaves typically when they're in the room with the doctor. I mean, my kids definitely didn't. So there's this question of how can the doctor get an insight into what's going on with the child? And parents are advocates for their children, but parents are also overly optimistic. So that could be complex. There's a very big study of the way that the vaccine theory was debunked was by watching videos of first birthdays. And there were, in doing double-blind scientific diagnosis, people could tell in first-year videos of children with autism that they had autism. But the parents had not realized it because we all want our kids to be okay. So there needs to be an objective external diagnosis, and that's, if that could be done in some objective, quantified, computational way, that would be best to catch things early. The other thing that we've done is we've actually had our robots. Remember how we had the elderly people imitating the robot and the robot imitating the elderly people? Well, that's just as useful with kids with autism. In fact, it's more useful because they often have trouble with imitation. So they don't know where to look, what to imitate, when to stop, when to start, what is salient, what is important. So we used it as a tool. Now it's become quite a popular thing to do. Imitation and autism is all the rage. I'm happy to see that. But we did this years ago. And here's an example. I just want to show you this because it illustrates again how complex these things are. So let's look at this. This is a boy in a special needs classroom doing an imitation of the robot. So there's the robot is talking and the child is talking. So the child does everything that the robot does, including what the robot says, and including its little position of the fingers and everything. So I bring this up because no one expects this. Everyone expects the child to not be able to imitate or to imitate partially and then be helped to imitate fully. Sure, that's the easy case, but most cases are not that easy. So you get children who don't know which part is important. This kid says everything that the robot says. That's not what we mean by imitation. How do you tell them which part is important and which part is not? There's no objective answer to that. That's just something that we learn socially through development and we take for granted. That's why this kind of therapy is really hard. Okay, so now I'm going to zoom really quickly out of some of the videos. I want to zoom really quickly in terms of some of the fundamental research problems. So one, as you already saw, was having a body. What does the robot look like and what does it do? There are issues of size. For example, we know that anything that is even more than 75% of our size and weight is going to be intimidating to us, although physiologically, so we might not be aware of it, but we're going to physiologically respond differently to things that are much larger. So big robots are out. That robot is way too big. But it moves so nicely. The use of social space is an incredibly powerful thing. So if I get too close to you, I gesticulate too much, that's no good. So proxemics, deixis, pointing, how I use pointing can be very rude or very effective. Body language, expressions of emotion. These are all things that are just research fields right now that people are trying to understand. Because what makes us, our bodies make us fundamentally human. So this idea of disembodied AI, I don't think that's going to bottom out. Because we perceive and relate to others by the way that we move. And there's plenty of neuroscience evidence on that. So I just want to show you one dissertation of a student of how would a robot know where to stand? How do we figure that out? Well, this was an entire PhD dissertation.
In this work, we consider how the robot recognizes both speech and gestures in a face-to-face social interaction. The robot first imagines itself at thousands of different locations in a room. At each location, it predicts how loudly the person will speak and in what region of space the person will gesture. The robot then predicts how well it will automatically recognize speech and gestures and assigns a score to the location based on this prediction. Finally, the robot selects the location at which it predicts it will perform the best and moves to that location. Here, we see the robot predicts will work well between 1.5 and 2.5 meters. The robot selects 1.7 meters as the optimal location to recognize human speech and gestures and moves there.
All right, now, that's how it does it for any point in space. Now we put that, we do this now continually. And if we're going to do it continually, we might as well do it to music. So when done correctly, proxemics is like dancing. And because I'm the advisor, I get to choose the music. And so my first student had to do this to disco. He didn't enjoy it, as you can tell by his facial expression. But I like to think that in my lab, disco is not dead. So there we go. The robot's not enjoying it either, but that's too bad. So when done correctly, proxemics can be dancing. But when done incorrectly or maliciously, proxemics can be bullying. So this robot, I sure wish I could have this louder.
Do you want me to?
I did not, I had asked it's not that, it's the speakers in the room.
Oh, right, okay.
No, there was a guy early on, but he assured me that I didn't need it louder. I should have asserted myself a bit more. So basically what happens is the person will do some kind of a bullying gesture and the robot will say, don't do that, that's bad because, it explains why it's bad. And so first of all, the robot never does any kind of bullying. We wouldn't want that. But it turns out there's already been research that shows that people bully robots. That wasn't us, but yeah, it's very sad. So there have been robots in Japanese museums that have been bullied by children. And there have been robots most of this is in Japan, come to think of it. But that's, I just think because they're deploying robots sooner. There have been robots that have been punched. Again, not our robots. So, what makes people feel that they're excused from social behavior? So, the robot wants to recognize the inappropriate behavior and help the person to stop it. In particular, because we're interested in doing this with children, because children do bully and then they turn into bullying adults, and they should not have that. But also, sometimes children act in bullying ways without realizing that they're bullying. And that is good to recognize and tell them about, because then there's a high chance that they won't do it again. Especially in some cases, children who have issues with social skills. So this was an interesting study in which we actually had the robot automatically detecting bullying and then telling people not to do it. So it says, you look like you're about to punch me. Don't do that. Punching is violent behavior. So we had this and we showed it to 1,000 children that came through an open house and collected a bunch of bullying data. They all thought that the robot was oversensitive and that it shouldn't just take things too seriously. So after you get the body bit right, then there's all of this issue with interaction, right? So timing, turn taking is incredibly difficult. Individuals on the autism spectrum have issues with turn taking, knowing when your turn is, when you should stop, when you should let the other person speak, doing them very hard. Social perception, understanding what's in the minds of others and how to predict intent, to understand your emotion, whether you're getting bored, tired, will she ever stop, all those things. Social roles. So should the robot be your equal? Should it be a subordinate? Or should it be a superior? We mentioned this earlier. Now you can see how that's not trivial. For children, the solution may be very different than for adults. Kids are not keen on having authorities. They have enough authorities in their lives. Whereas, for maybe an exercise coach, as an adult, I might like some really buff robot that knows what's going on. I'm okay if it's an authority in that realm. Right? So these things are really complex. And they are, by many accounts, what drove our intelligence to evolve to be so complex, is the interactions with other people. We are each other's ultimate complexity. And so it's complex for the robots as well. So let me tell you how the robots are doing some good. So beyond the stuff that you've already seen, one thing that you might worry about is, well, what happens when we put robots and people together? Maybe the robots will make people be less social, the way that screens right now are making people less social one-to-one. I'm quite sure it's the same in Britain, but certainly the data in the US are that now 12-year-old children have the skills of 8-year-olds because they're not doing eye-to-eye interactions and actual training of social skills. So that's concerning. And so we actually developed a robot that has the ability to be a moderator, precisely with this in mind. We wanted to put a robot in a social setting with people and get that robot to get people to talk more and to balance the situation. I'm sure everyone's aware of these dynamics that happen when you're in a group. You get the one loudmouth who hogs all the talking, and then you get the quiet person who really has the most interesting stuff to say, and then, but never speaks, and then all the others, right? So another one of my wonderful students, Elaine Short, created a set of algorithms that allow the robot to cue people to talk without even understanding what they're saying. So she did it purely based on body language and who is talking and when and for how long. Doesn't matter what they're saying. The robot has no idea, doesn't even understand language. And that's really important because if you think about it, social skills are very much non-linguistic. Okay, so, and of course animals have a lot of social skills without having language. So she did a bunch of different algorithms, but what I really want to tell you about is what we found, and we tested this with adults, with children, across generations, special needs typically developing. And what she found was not only were people willing to accept the robot as a moderator, and if the robot said, okay, well, how about if he talks a little bit? What we found was that people accepted the robot across ages, etc. The person who was encouraged by the robot to speak felt a lot better about the interaction. And this is the part, so this is what moderators do. This just validates that a robot can be moderated. But the best part was that we found that people who had been previously kind of hogging the resources of the conversation, they were talking the most, ended up being less selfish. So if they were talking too much, they would talk less. They would even cue the other person now, taking the model from the robot. And if they were playing games, we did a version in which they were playing games, they stopped being as selfish in gameplay. They stopped playing completely for their own winning and started taking turns that would allow the other people to equalize their play. So ultimately, we could show that robots can make people less selfish. So think about that. Robots making people more human? I guess that's what we need. So, long term is the hardest part. How do we make these effects last? So we can do very interesting things today on a short time scale. I told you my longest study was 6 months, and that was with Alzheimer's patients. So in some sense, it was always novel to them in a way that is much more challenging if you put something for 6 months in someone's house. So how do you make it last? And there are two reasons why robots really have to learn. The first one is that you can never program them to be perfect, so they will have to adapt. They will have to figure out how to do things because there's just no way they'll know everything. And then the second reason they must learn is that they have to continue to be interesting. And that's very hard because people's relationships wear out. We as humans are not great at relationships. I think everyone's aware of marriage statistics. What are they in the UK? It's 50% divorce in the US. I don't know what it is here.
42.
42, okay, you win, but just very little margin. So it's interesting, and especially if we see these patterns of people becoming differently able to have relationships by using only screens, then what does this mean? And it's interesting to contemplate then how machines can maybe scaffold more social interaction, counterintuitively. I just want to tell you about a couple of interesting studies in closing that we're doing. These are, again, more clinical, so this is about deployment now, putting studies in actual environments and leaving them there. So for the last 5 months or so, we have had a robot at Children's Hospital Los Angeles continually interacting with patients as they come in to have an intravenous insertion in order to do some kind of imaging, right? So, big IUD goes in the arm. So the way this came about, and this is just to give you a sense of how research works in my lab, which is, I just think, just wonderful. We had someone come in from Children's Hospital Los Angeles who works with children who are experiencing pain. And she said, Dr. Margaret Trost, she came in and said, I read a paper about some researchers using a robot to distract children who are getting flu shots. And I'm wondering, and that works. You give a kid a robot, you give them a flu shot, they don't even notice the flu shot. So she said, can we do the same for IVs? She said, but there's a catch, they're in a bed, and it takes 15 minutes, and it's a really big needle. So I'm thinking distraction is not the best way. And anyway, the state of the art right now for coping with pain is distraction. You give kids iPads, right? That's what happens today. But it turns out that doesn't work terribly well. It's okay, but it's not great because it doesn't help children really cope with the pain. It's distracting them. Many of these children have chronic conditions. They have to keep coming in. So the fear of pain is the worst part, right? The pain is coming. How bad is it going to be? It's coming, it's coming. And it's the anticipation that really brings up anxiety for everybody, not just for children. So how to cope? Well, it turns out different people cope differently. Some people just really don't want to think about it. Others want to take deep breaths and kind of center themselves. Still others, that's my one. Still others want to really understand what's going to happen. So for some children, and I think this is impressive, some children really want to know where the needle is going to go. How big is the needle? Is it going to feel cold? Exactly. And if you show them the cross-section and the needle and everything, they can calm down. because they no longer have this fear of the unknown. So these are coping strategies, and people cope in different ways. If I took a test with all of you, you would all classify in these different categories of how you want to cope. So you want your robot to give you the right coping strategy. So that's what we did. We had a robot that could give these different coping strategies. One was calming, another one was telling you the truth of the needle, and then the third one was the distraction. I'll play videos for you. And we're collecting data from 90 children, and these are kids who have never interacted with any of this. They come in for a procedure, and if they agree to be in our study, they're in the study. And what we have found was, interestingly, that, and we've only done, actually by now, 20 participants out of the 90. So it's too soon to say, I'm not promising anything, but the trend is that the robot that allows the child to learn a coping strategy is reported as they like the robot the best. They also feel that they experience the least pain, right? Pain is all about what you notice in the moment and then what you remember, because the memory is going to affect you the next time. So when we ask them how they remember the pain, they report less than if they were being distracted. For some kids, the distraction actually makes them feel more pain or remember more pain. Okay, maybe it's because I'm so distracted, but now comes the pain. And then the control was, just we actually had the robot do nothing, because you always want to know that it isn't just the robot being there, that it's about what it actually does. So the robot just being there does nothing. That was good to know. I think it's bad when people do these studies where the robot does many things and then they make claims and you don't know if it's actually what it did. I mean, there's a lot of work, for example, with some robots where I think if they tried it with a stuffed animal, I would like to know how it compares. The comparison was never done. So these controls are important. We actually went into a first grade classroom for 6 sessions, 3 weeks, to try to get kids, first graders, to learn about healthy food choices. Now, if you have not had a challenge in your life yet, try to get a first grader to choose something healthy to eat, as opposed to something not healthy, which is readily available. And unfortunately, yes, I've watched all the videos by J.B. Oliver here. Good stuff. So, yeah, kids are exposed to too much junk food. They're all addicted to junk food. There's nothing better. It's hard to change those habits, especially when they don't have a lot of choice. So we thought we would add a robot in. And there's some really interesting lessons here, including that the robot has to be a character, it has to have a backstory, it has to have an existence of its own to be interesting. Because, again, just telling the kid that, gee, that white bagel is just really not good for you, doesn't do anything. They already know that the white bagel is not good for them. They're still not going to do the other, whatever it is, fried bagel or whatever, fried piece of dry bread that they're told to do, right? So it's all about motivation, and for them the motivation was to engage with the robot. So I'll just play you a short video.
Yum-tastic! Fiber One is the best one. Why do you think this is such a healthy cereal?
Because it's healthy for me and it makes me strong.
Yes, and it's healthy because it has fiber in it. Do you know what fiber is good for?
Well, do you? Well, just stop right there, but you probably know better than she does, poor thing. And you can also notice that we've moved away from these kind of more humanoid, larger robots to smaller desktop robots, and there's a reason for that, especially if we want to make these things affordable and get them out there. And I was asked if I brought a robot today. Well, when they're like this, I can just put one under my arm and bring it, right? And that's about accessibility as well. So it's not that we're no longer working with the others, but there are issues of cost. There are also issues of danger. So the more human-sized and articulated the robot is, the more batteries it has, the more motors it has. The more motors it has, the more weight it has. The more weight it has, the more batteries it needs in order to run. So now you need more batteries. So there's this cycle, right? It becomes, if it has strength, it's potentially dangerous. So it's worth exploring the simpler, smaller, lighter form factors, because they're inherently not dangerous. And then just the last thing in terms of learning and this notion of we have data everywhere, how can this help? So in learning and learning differences in particular, I mean, not just learning, but in everything, if we can create challenges for people so that they can learn at their own pace in the way that is best for them. And so one of the things that we and some others have also been working on is how to get multimodal data from children or adults interacting with the machine so that we can improve that interaction. So, for example, with the child, we want to not just watch how the child is interacting with the tablet and whether they're getting the game right or the educational program right. We want to look at where they're looking, where's their eye gaze. So they look at the robot, they look at the tablet. Do they speak? How much do they move? Putting all of those data together. Do they ask for help? Do they look around? All of this stuff. Do they yawn? And so we can collect all of these data, multimodal data, and then what machine learning methods can we apply to analyze this? This is a completely open problem. So there isn't a single researcher in the world today who can give you an answer to that. I know because I've tried to talk to all of them. For all of these deep learning people, no one knows how to deal with really messy human data. And human data are messy. Kids hide the emotions. They cover their mouth. They stop looking. They run away. They come back. When you gesture, you don't gesture exactly when you talk. It's a little offset, but not in any exactly predictable way and in a completely personalized way. There are all kinds of social cues that happen that are rich, that we all understand, and that are incredibly hard to analyze. So there's this whole bigger science that needs to happen, a really multimodal human-machine interaction that needs to be studied. And as yet, we don't have great methods for that. So it's going to be an interesting next several years, a decade perhaps, as fields get to that. And there's a lot of interest commercially in doing this. So large and fast strides will happen. I want to just show you a quick video of how it works when it works really well. As an example of where we can get. And then often you don't get things working this well, especially with kids with autism. Here's a little kid, very little kid, doing an exercise with a robot. It's a number exercise. This is teaching them numeracy, early number learning. Well, I wish you could hear it. This is a 3-year-old. So, the robot cued the child does it, says it, looks at the robot repeats it, she looks down, she does it, she says it, she looks. Turn taking, listening, talking at the right time, everything is beautiful. Getting a 3-year-old to do that is something. Getting a 3-year-old with autism to do that is amazing. That's the kind of technology we're trying to get at. These kind of helping people with learning differences and behavior differences to reach their goal. So in the words of one of our boys with autism,
these robots are mindless. So with these robots, is it?
So he kept saying, nothing's wrong with the robots, nothing's wrong with the robots. And we couldn't figure out why he kept saying that. So we asked the therapist, and the therapist conveyed to us that, well, what do you think this little boy who's on the spectrum, what do you think his experience is day in and day out for the world? The world very clearly messages to him that there's something wrong with him. And he's so excited that there's nothing wrong with this robot and I can play with this robot. And so I tell all students who watch my talks and see this and think, if that doesn't give you goosebumps about the potential of technology, well, then you should get a lobotomy. There's something wrong with you. Because that's, because we have to all these students that are like, I don't know what I should do for a living. I'm like, well, why don't you do some good? So there's this tremendous potential here because the child is somehow projecting and bonding with the machine. How sad, because he has no friends, because no one wants to play with him. So maybe we can create these robots that will bring other kids to play with them because they'll be cool and the other kids will want to play with them. So there are these interesting social dynamics that emerge that we don't understand. So we want to understand them and then replicate them in order to be therapeutic. Now, in the words of our cheater, and I hope you can hear this because she's so articulate about this. Some people heard that husband bashing there. I'm sorry she said it. But really, realistically, she's had a stroke, her husband has to help her, right? So he gets tired, right? So really, if you think about the whole ecosystem of care, creating these technologies is not just about helping the patient, it's helping the whole world, the ecosystem around them. And that makes it harder, right? Because it needs to be something that works for everyone, and that's often lost on technology developers as well. So there are a lot of lessons there, but not to bash technology developers. When people tell us this, right? So she said that more than 12 years ago, the stroke patient I worked with, and we explained this, and she said, the sooner you can do this, the better. And so I thought, here we published all these papers, and there are all these companies doing stuff, and they're not doing stuff for people with special needs. And so I figured I'll do it. I'll do a startup. So we started a company to work on these social assistive robotics so that we can learn a lot of the lessons. And it's just, it's been a wonderful thing to do. Like I say, this is a great time to be in the field because there's so much potential. Things are moving very quickly. Hopefully, they're moving in the right direction. You need to make sure of that. So with that, I want to thank you all, and thank you for having me. I'm over time. I'm so sorry. I'm always over time. It's all good.
Time for questions. There's some time for questions. So, questions, yes.
I'm very interested in the, we were talking about the uncanny valley, about the faces, because this is something we talk a lot about. And C3PO is humanoid, but people tend to prefer R2D2 with no humanoid features at all.
Right.
And some of your robots have human features, some don't. Where do you see the balance? What's the minimum you need for that engagement? Does it need eyes and a nose? Does it need to blink? Does it need to do what?
So that's a very good question, and there is no answer to that, as you know, in any objective way. You need to have enough flexibility to convey whatever messages you need to convey. This is true for animals as well, right? Animals have eyes because they need to see, not because of social signaling. But then the eyes end up being used for social signaling in a lot of ways, right? And so I would say when we're developing machines, we have this freedom to develop whatever. And I think some people are choosing the freedom. Instead of choosing the freedom, they're saying, I'm just going to imitate what people are doing or what animals are doing, but then there are issues. If you go the other way, from the simplest, for example, take the Now robot, which just has eyes that have color, so they just display color, and there's nothing else, there's no mouth, there's nothing. So I would say that that is not a good design. My apologies to those folks. They're nice folks, but that's not a very good design for human-machine interaction. Why? Because when you look at a face, they already have a head, so when there's a head, people expect a face, so they're going to look at the head. By the way, we did studies a long time ago with just a camera, left, right, can't-field zoom, and people thought that was the face. Because that's how you think, right? You look for a head-like thing. So now there is a head, so that begs the faceless expectation. And then they have no mouth, but then which a mouth is highly expressive, right? They have eyes, but the only thing the eyes do is color. Okay, so that's problematic because if the eyes turn red, people think, oh, anger or evil. No other color of the eyes makes sense. Green, okay, green from sort of a machine perspective, green means operating naturally. What do orange eyes mean? What do teal eyes mean? I don't know. What, it's flashing, what does that mean, right? So again, if you have a humanoid robot, and then you start putting signaling on it that is completely non-humanoid, that's a terrible idea, because you've now smushed two worlds. If you're gonna have a humanoid robot, then you must use a subset of human signaling for people to accept it. But that, the more humanoid you are, now the more expectation you're setting. So it's a lot easier to go the non-humanoid way, because then the expectations are different or non-existent, right? And I think people are starting to discover this. They're doing more kind of artificial form factors. And then they have kind of the freedom to experiment. Because people will attribute to any natural movement. There's a famous study a long time ago of just a triangle in a box, and the triangle moves around, actually two, and people attribute all kinds of things. It's like, oh, it's a love triangle, and this one is a bully, and this one is chasing this one. Oh, look, now she's hiding. Well, now suddenly we have a gender thing going on with triangles, right? We do this. We're so fully loaded with social expectations, right? So the same happens to the machines we're interacting with, and therefore, I think you have to be careful from the design perspective. There were a lot of studies of the Roomba vacuum cleaner, where people think it's smarter than their dog, and they swear by it, and apparently, because, well, now they're not that cheap, but they used to be pretty cheap. And when they broke, you send them back to the company wants to send you a new one. People don't want that. They want theirs, they etch on it, oh, this is really ghosty. Really again, never Susie. But anyway, just saying. So, I mentioned briefly in passing the design is such a critical part of this endeavor, and it is. I think it's this combination of understanding usability, but also understanding human expectations, which is really behavior science. So taking lessons from that. I don't know if it gets to your answer.
I mean, we had a meeting earlier today in our lab, and there was a Pepper robot being programmed, and I ended up throwing something at it because it kept staring at us, and it's those big black eyes.
Yes, exactly. Well, so Pepper is a big version of the Now, and it has, I can't tell how different it is than a big Now. That's an issue. And you saw in one of the things that we did, we had a robot that didn't have a mouth. A mouth is hard to actuate, so the more motors, again, the more cost. So maybe you can put LEDs, right? But then you have to be careful, because if you have LEDs for the mouth, but you have actually moving eyes, that's, again, a cognitive dissonance, right? So it has to be done properly. The other thing that's interesting is some people are developing back projection, right? So you have a screen and then you're projecting, but if you project something super detailed or realistic, that's really creepy, right? So, but it's interesting that people are, I think, pushing a lot of these frontiers now, and that's exciting. We'll learn a lot, and there'll be a lot of bad stuff out there. Bad as in just creepy. Yes.
So next question.
I think you made a distinction, if I heard correctly, at the beginning of your talk, between artificial intelligence and robotics, and say this wasn't artificial intelligence. How is that different?
Well, that's a great question that you caught me. Yeah. So I get now in the days of hot AI and hot robotics, I get asked all the time if they're the same or not. So if any intelligent system is AI, then sure, it's AI. But if you look at what people are doing in artificial intelligence, like if you go to conferences in the field, robotics and AI are separate conferences. The work is very separate. The work historically in AI has not used approaches that can deal with uncertainty and messiness of the real world. The real world is very messy. Noise, the notion of uncertainty, is fundamental to robotics. And most AI systems are much too brittle for that. Or they assume that you have a model of noise. Well, if you have that, you don't. You don't. It's kind of like saying, if I had a perfect human model, then I would know how to interact with humans. But there is no such thing. So the fields are definitely coming together, but if you still look at what's happening in AI and machine learning, they're working with really clean data. That was my point earlier. Take real human data, real messy, noisy, asynchronous, inconsistent data, and then work with that. And then I'll be happy to call you AI for robotics and ML for robotics. But until then, until the data being used are just one modality. Oh, it's speech data. Oh, and we tagged it. Oh, and we took people out that had lisps, and we took people out who had mustaches, and blah, 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 blah. Right? So the real world is very messy. And that's what happens whenever you have a physical robot in the real world. You can't avoid the mess. It's right there. Like, it's in this world, and the carpet has a break in it, and you just can't avoid it. You can't fix all carpeting for the robots. That's why the challenge has been different. But eventually, they will come together, but I have been saying that for some decades. So people tend to pick the problems they're comfortable with, right?
I wanted to take your comment. A lot of your examples talk about how human behaviour is adapted in a different way than working with humans. And I just wondered if you figured out why that was the case. Like you said about the mediating, for example, in the meeting.
So why do we see these effects in people? Well, so I think in general, what's happening is we're wired to be social relative to other humans. And so we project that on everything else. We project it on animals, right? So for example, people think that their animals are much smarter and more capable than they could possibly be, knowing what we know, but that's okay. And we do the same with robots when it's done right. And so I think people, for example, are much more willing to take a robot moderator than a human moderator, because this robot moderator doesn't make them feel bad, right? So, it's not like having this guy come in and now this guy is telling me that I should talk less. Well, who is this guy, right? Oh, it's a robot. Oh, okay, well, maybe I can talk to him. What do you think, right? So there's this forgiveness that happens because people they treat it like a human-like creature, but it isn't a human. We see the same effect with people using robots in the assistive context. For example, stroke patients are not as bothered about asking for help from a robot than they are from other people, because often they'll say, oh, I don't want to put him out. We get the same effect with the other. I don't want to put it in my mouth. I don't want to bother them. They're embarrassed by their need. But they're not embarrassed by their need in front of a robot because it's okay. It's a robot. So that's an advantage that needs to be played right, but if you fall into the uncanny valley, you might lose it.
Okay, first here and then next.
You mentioned about Japan. I heard that in Japan, people are... You mentioned about Japan, and I heard that in Japan, people are preferring robots as their friends or mates or partners. What sort of robots are they? Have you any idea?
Well, I wouldn't. That sounds a little hypey to me. I definitely think Japan is very progressive in terms of developing all kinds of robots and trying them out, but you know, for example, it's very different from the US in the sense that someone's phone is going off quite a lot. Is it for me?
That's it. Okay.
All right. So I mean, I think, you know, you get all this media hype, right? So in Japan, they are very progressive. They're trying all kinds of different robots. That's why in Japan, robots get bullied because they exist. In here, it's much harder to go to a museum and have here in the US as well. It's not so common that I can go into a museum and have a robot tour guide, and therefore I can't bully one because it's not available. So I'm just saying, Japanese are very progressive in that. They're investing a lot in robotics, but that's also because of the way you don't have foreign labor, right? So these are all effects. So I wouldn't, but it's definitely true that as a society, Japan tends to be much more open to technology development compared to, for example, the US. I can't speak for the UK, but you're probably more similar to the US than you are to Japan, safe to say. So it just takes longer and they're much more willing to experiment. But I wouldn't give too much weight to any of these stories. I'm very careful about what I read because if I read everything, it just keeps saying, oh, everything has been solved. You know, AI has solved everything. Deep learning, it's all done. It's not.
But is it possible to design a robot which can act as your kind of personal accountability, monitor or mentor, like a secretary? I mean, soon we have robots as our secretaries. So then,
well, so aside from my lack of appeal of the term secretary, I prefer it to be as like an assistant. People have been thinking about this idea as like a minder, so something that will remember everything you do. People are doing that. I mean, there are mechanisms. For a while, Google Glass was going to do this, so you remember everything, and kind of this information gets stored. And I think that's definitely coming. Soon, people will have. We'll be wearing, I don't know about privacy, but we'll be wearing devices that are looking and capturing everything we experience and then looking things up. And I'm pretty sure there's a Black Mirror episode. That kind of thing will happen. I don't know why you need a robot for that, right? So this is where it gets into understanding what the use of the technology is versus a robot. I mean, I'd like to think that the robots they're physical for a reason. There's peers. And if you really want just a service, then why do you need a robot to do that? Because that starts to get very close to slavery. When I hear here in the UK, there's actually already a discussion about robot rights, which is really interesting. We haven't thought about that in the US. We're more concerned about human rights being lost to robots taking jobs. But it's an interesting notion, right? If you're creating that kind of a thing. And so I would say, people are already worried about, for example, not being able to know where anything is because they're constantly looking at GPS. If you outsource all of your thinking, that's kind of worrisome, right? But that's just something to think about.
So, the question.
Thank you. I wonder if you would return to the question of realism in the robots. And I'm particularly interested in the case of the children with autism spectrum conditions. And the robot therapist was more effective than a human therapist for children who had difficulty forming social relationships. Did that actually transfer? So did they only learn how to form relationships with the robot, or did they learn how to form relationships with people as a result of that?
It's much, much too soon. Like I said, there are numerous, hundreds and hundreds of studies that people have done around the world. There's certainly a fair bit of work actually in robotics for autism here in the UK. Kirsten Jotunheim, for example, does quite a bit of work at Sheffield. So there are a lot of little studies that have been done, and I say little by clinical study standards, where usually large N, double blind, etc. That has not been done almost anywhere. There's been a little bit of work on ABA therapy, that kind of thing, but in general, very little has been done on robotics for autism. So there are a lot of small studies that show effects like that, but there frankly isn't money in the system anywhere to bring these studies to the right size, to actually develop enough robust machines, put them in homes, and work on this. And so it may well be that ends up happening commercially rather than through research, because the need is very large, and it's just not being met. So it isn't that there aren't a lot of researchers out there who would love to do it. This is something that I get asked a lot. So I get asked all the time, why aren't there definitive studies on efficacy on robotics for autism? Well, it's not because we wouldn't like to do the study, but no one's funding that work. So that's why everyone's doing small bits and pieces.
So I suppose a follow-up question is, are you worried about the children forming inappropriate relationships with the robots?
Well, that's a good question. I think if the technology is developed right, no, because these children, just like anyone, need help 24/7. And so if you put a robot in their life the way some parents get blamed, like, you put the child in front of the TV. He used to be in front of the TV. Now it's the iPad. But right, I mean, if you remove all human care and you use the machine as a proxy, unless that machine is perfect, yes, there will be negative effects. But again, if we're assigning blame, who is to blame in that, right? So right now, with the standard of care, there are only so many hours a day that children on the spectrum can get professional care for. And the parents are, going into bankruptcy, getting divorced. It's incredibly hard to take care of a child with special needs. And then it runs in families, so families will have more than one child on the spectrum, right? So there's just the ecosystem of care is not strong enough. And I see these technologies as a part of the ecosystem. Now, if you look at it as a magic bullet, then of course it's going to be used. It just has to be something that will help the child some amount of time per day, that's all. But to your specific point about whether it can be abused, definitely. I'm sure any technology can be abused, right? The point is it designed in a human-centered and ethical way? And if it is, I think it has the potential to help.
Time for one more question. Yeah? Okay.
Hi. That was a wonderful talk. I enjoyed it very much. My question is about something that you have hinted very, very briefly. It's about the novelty effect. From things I have read, people that do, for example, AI to help people learning in education, in schools, there's this effect where you put technology into the learning ecosystem, and then for a short time, all the results are great, and the kids learn more, etc. Then novelty wears out, and sometimes technology doesn't make any effect. You have mentioned that briefly, you have mentioned that your studies are not long, but probably you have more insight than what you have shared. Would you like to share a bit more about what you see as a possible novelty effect, yes or no, in this field? Thank you.
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's a general question about any kind of a behavioral study, which is, there's always a possibility of a novelty effect. There's also a possibility of the bias on the part of the participants. Because after all, we're running studies, people have to agree to be in them. People who don't want to be in them are already a subset of the population that you're not representing. So these are real issues. With a novelty effect, we do try to break that as much as possible. So we're going to do a study starting in August where we're going to leave the robots in the homes of children with autism for 30 days. So that's supposed to get over the novelty effect because, it's hard to keep someone interesting for 30 days or something interesting for 30 days. The same thing with I was going to say the thing that we're doing in Children's Hospital has been there for months, but to each individual child it's still novel, although the nursing personnel who are part of that ecosystem, they're very used to it. So the answer is absolutely just doing the right practice, which is develop it to be robust enough to leave with the user, whether it's a child or an adult. And people are still now developing systems that can be robust enough. We're just right now at a point where there are commercial systems that can do this well enough, right? So they can do enough speech recognition, they can do enough vision in real time. So this is just starting to happen. Because what's happened up until now is that every lab that wanted to do this would have to build its own robot and put all the systems together. And this is really hard because in my world, most of my students are computer scientists, so they don't know how to do hardware. Suddenly they're supposed to do hardware. And you could say, well, why don't you hire electrical engineers? Sure, who's going to pay for that, right? So it's hard. It's hard to be interdisciplinary. And then on top of it all, they have to do human subjects, and they have to design human subjects experiments, and they have to do human subjects approvals. Whoa, that's scary, so you've never done that, right? So, oh boy, we're on top of the ethics, right? So it's hard. So I think that's a reason why a lot of these studies are still new and they're small, and they're short term. Because the systems aren't robust enough. But that is changing so fast that I fully expect within the next 5 years that we're going to have enough platforms that can be left in the home. They won't be perfect because they're being developed as products, right? And products have a different purpose. But it's something. Up until now, they weren't perfect because there was some robot that was built for something 5 years ago that I'm now using for something else. So they weren't perfect then, they're still not perfect now, but they will be much closer, and we will get well beyond novelty because we'll be able to leave them in people's homes. And if you see what's happening in the commercial world, this is already happening. So Amazon Echo, Google Home, all of these systems are trying to kind of prove their worth. Are they, you bought it, are you using it? What is it providing to you in a continuous way? So some of these things, some of these technologies are going to be useful. Some of them are being opened up. So I'm optimistic that right now, because there's so much going on and so hot, some of these things are becoming open enough where there can be synergy actually in the commercial world and in research, so that both sides can benefit. Because until now, either there was no industry, or if there was no industry, it was closed. So it's a very interesting time. It's never a dull moment. Like, I don't know what tomorrow will come out in the news that will change things. It's great. It's a great time in this field. Even for the really hard questions like yours.
Okay, I'll now call on Professor Karen Chaplin to give a vote of thanks for a fantastic evening.
Yes, I think Maya gets a chance to escape from the podium for a second. So I just wanted to say thank you to our fantastic audience here at BCS in London. Thank you very much to all of those who have joined us by live cast, and I'm going to list them. So we have people from Aberystwyth, Bath, Edge Hill, Edinburgh, Glasgow, Hull, Loughborough, Newcastle, Plymouth, Queen's University Belfast, Robert Gordon University, and the University of Southern California. So I think that's amazing. I know there have been some technical problems, so I'm sorry, I'm looking at the live cast camera now. I'm sorry that it's not been fantastic. You didn't get to have the terrific presence quite that Maya has here in the room, but next year will be better. Thank you also very much to the people who made this possible, to BCS for sponsoring the Karen Spark-Jones Lecture, and IBM, our joint sponsors with that. The Karen Spark-Jones Lecture is a really important showcase for saying, yes, women do computing science. And not only that, they do really exciting computing science. It's not just a thing for boys. We're here too. So Maya's been a terrific example of that. I also have to thank BCS staff who have been calm and collected throughout the whole organisational process of this. Miles Ellison and Zaharin Jabir here in London, and also Simon Jones, who's looked after the tech for tonight. So those people have all been terrific and essential to the whole process, as well as our lovely speakers tonight. So we had Paul Martinenko, who's the BCS president, and Nelsa Farah from IBM, doing an excellent job of introducing our speaker, and John Shaw Taylor, who also did an excellent job of shepherding our question session. I thought Maya's talk was really terrific and really inspiring, and the bit at the beginning where you said about being funny, you've definitely cracked that being funny thing, you know, because there were just so many moments. I love the idea that you have introvert and extrovert robots. I think I like an introvert robot, probably. I like your two take-home messages as well, that we are not replacing people. This is not about replacing people by robots. This is about supplementing the people we have, so that we can do things more effectively. That's terrific. I also like to think about old people who learn technology as well, because, you know, I'm working towards being an old people. And I think that maybe, you know, the technology, I'm still going to like technology when I get to that point. I also love the fact that you talked so much about your work that sits in a really interesting intersection of not just computing science, but also engineering, and also psychology, and cognition, and human behaviour, and human-computer interaction. And yeah, interdisciplinarity is really, really hard to balance. And it's really hard to explain to people why you're doing what you're doing and why they should give you some money to do some more of what you're doing. And I think that the best message actually was something that you said really very early on, which was that computing science is not what you think it is, And by the time you got into it, the will have changed. And I thought, yeah, that's definitely right, you know, because when I started computing science about 30 years ago now, it was a totally different beast. I'm sure everybody in this room can echo that sort of thing, but computing has changed massively over time. So if we look at some of the things you showed us tonight, how we can see how those things will change in the next 30 years, it's going to be amazing. So thank you very much, Maya. And you may have heard the tempting noise of things being set up outside. Please do stay with us for a while to have some drinks and nibbles, and you might even get a chance to talk to Maya. Thank you very much.
And then the jingling of everything Huh? Yeah, I mean, I don't. Right, let me get you a hard drive. Cool.
I'm a robot, I've never lied.
It's going to be about 300 gig on there. Oh yeah.
Little burger and something. George. Sorry? Tiny burger.
This is
What's this electrical? Karen Spark.
Oh, my favorite. So, then we're out of tea. Oh, we did it. So, right, okay, it's fantastic.
The camera itself. Well, I mean, both.